Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Miri, which is episode 12 of season 1 of Star Trek The Original Series. This video is part of a series of videos where I cover every episode of Star Trek The Original Series, one episode at a time. In this video, I will cover the first season episode, Miri. So, Miri is the episode where the Enterprise discovers a planet that's exactly like Earth. However, no one seems to be around. They beam down. They only find children. And they find that as soon as children enter puberty, they catch this disease that turns them into crazy madmen and they die. And then, of course, the landing party all catch this disease because they're all adults, and so they race to try to find a cure to this disease while the children misunderstand their presence there and actively try to sabotage them. So eventually Kirk must negotiate with them, and they eventually are able to cure the disease and return the planet to order. That synopsis completely left out the main character, of course, Miri, who is this young girl that had a crush on Kirk, but really I thought she was kind of inconsequential to the plot, which is why I left her out. But anyway, so I always actually really liked this episode when I was younger. I used to really like this episode a lot. As I got older, of course, and I grew out of it a bit. But, it was always an interesting concept for me. Like, the whole premise was a really fascinating premise, that there was this society where they tried to make this this fountain of youth, basically. They tried to make a serum that would allow people to live forever, like an ageless serum, but it ended up backfiring and, like, having that effect with only I'm trying to say the word, but I'm not going to pronounce it correctly. But kids who haven't gone through puberty yet. It only has that effect of prolonging their lives and making their lives a lot longer. But anyone who has gone through puberty, it gives them this disease that kills them, that makes them go insane and then die. So that's a very interesting concept, in that they would come across this planet like 300-something years after it went through this catastrophe, and find that these children have been living on their own for a couple hundred years with no adults around, and what the society of just children are based off of. But also, they come right at a convenient time because it's right before they're about to run out of food, and they're all going to starve because they were just living off of all the massive supplies left over from all the adults dying off, and that those supplies are dwindling after a couple hundred years. So this is all that's a very interesting premise to me. It's something I really latched on to, especially when I was a teenager and I didn't really notice all the very visible flaws in this episode. One of the biggest flaws, the one that I believe my sister always latched on to and why she never liked this episode, is the fact that the Enterprise discovers an exact duplicate of Earth. And in fact, that's the whole teaser for this episode. Like, the whole, before the credits come on, it's like, oh my god, it's another Earth. And they come back from the credits and it's never mentioned again. It's like, oh, who cares? It's another Earth. Let's go with it. And it makes zero, even the continents look exactly the same. And the society was brought up the same. Like, this is basically where they beam down to, is 1960s America, because they're saying that the 60s is when everyone got wiped out, and so everything's preserved. And this makes absolutely zero sense, and it's some of the dumbest thing that the original series will do. Now, the original series will visit 20 planets that just so happen to look like 20th century Earth many times, but to be fair, the explanations in those other episodes are actually at least better than this, because this one is to gives you no explanation. It's just, oh, it's a duplicate Earth. Who cares? Whereas the other ones, they're not like the continents aren't exactly the same. It's not a duplicate of Earth. It's just for some reason their culture got contaminated by someone from Earth to emulate Earth, like the piece of the action where they emulated 1930s or 40s or 20s, whatever it was, gangsters. God, Patterns of Force is the name of the other one where they all went emulated Nazi Germany. And then there was also, I can't remember the explanation for bread and circuses when they emulated the Roman Empire. I think that was happening before the Starfleet vessel came. I don't know, but regardless, the explanations they came up with in those other episodes were at least there. Like, there's no explanation here whatsoever. But I agree with my sister in regards where I don't like those episodes. I don't like any of these episodes that emulate 20th century Earth, or where they just go to another planet that just so happens to be just like 20th century Earth. Now, later incarnations of Star Trek would find a workaround on being able to do stuff about the 20th century that makes more sense, and it's called the holodeck. So instead of traveling to planets where the aliens just so happen to be emulating 20th century, they can just go in the holodeck and recreate 20th century. But of course, for me, I would beg the question, why would all these people in the 24th century want to recreate the 20th century? It's, and it all boils down to the ultimate excuse. It's this TV show that's airing in the 20th century. So that's why they're emulating the 20th century. And that's why these other planets are emulating the 20th century, because so the audience can connect to it more. And of course, also, it's cheaper. They don't have to build as many sets. They could just film an actual reality. And that's the main reason why they're doing this. In fact, I heard that there was apparently some parallel Earth theory that actually had no credibility whatsoever, but the TV producers latched onto it because it meant that they could film in cheaper sets and not have to create all these futuristic looking sets. So they're just like, let's just do the same Earth. Let's just have them come across a planet just like Earth for no reason whatsoever, because it's cheaper for us to film there. So I will agree that is probably the biggest knock against this episode. But on the other hand, unlike the Patterns of Force or Bread and Circuses, it's also easier to dismiss. It's easier for me to just overlook, because it's not essential to the plot, which is why it shouldn't be there in the first place. But it's easier because I could just pretend this is just some alien world that doesn't look exactly like Earth. But where this weird scenario happened. So it's easier for me to just be like, oh yeah, parallel Earth, that's dumb, but let's move beyond that. Where something like a piece of the action, I'm being constantly bombarded and reminded that this is a 1920s Chicago gangster thing, so I can't overlook the fact that just doing a 20th century bullshit thing, where here I can get sort of wrapped up in the specifics of this disease and this fantastic scenario that has nothing to do with 20th century Earth. But that's just the way I look at it. But yeah, I do agree that is definitely a huge knock against this episode. Now, so I find the scenario that they're in really interesting, which is what attracted me a lot to this episode. But there's a lot of course, other things wrong with it. So there's the way the children behave, and this is something I noticed from the moment I watched this episode, even when I was a teenager in the 90s, is very dated. Like, I know I say that a lot about the original series, but this in particular, like the way that they show children behavior, going na 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 ollie ollie oxen free, seems really dated in the 60s. Like, that's not how children behaved in the 80s or 90s or present day. So that seems very, very dated. That's something I learned about from watching older movies, from watching older TV shows and movies as a kid from the 60s or earlier, that they were portrayed. Now, whether or not they did actually behave like that, or that that's just how they portrayed it on the movies, I don't know, because I wasn't alive then. But regardless, the feeling of it is very 60s-esque, and that's another thing I had to overlook. And as I said, this is something I've always noticed. But I was always willing to give it a pass for that, because it was a show made in the 60s. But yeah, it is a bit annoying, and it does. When I was trying to, as I said, when I watch these episodes to do these reviews, it's not just like sitting down and enjoying some leisure time and watching some TV. I try to sort of use my education and my analytical brain and try to analyze it and think about it. And this episode had me kind of going in circles, because I'm not a child sociologist. I'm not an expert on children. I don't really know, or biologist for that matter. I don't really know how children's brains develop. But it made me wonder a lot that these kids have been around for a couple hundred years, that wouldn't they become wiser just from the sheer fact of experience, of having that much experience, and plus having to fend for themselves, because there's no adults around to take care of them. Like, they just casually mention how there's food around that the children are running out of, but where do they find this food? How do they cultivate this food? How do they keep this food fresh? Is it all canned food? Are they just eating off of canned food? Who cooks their food? Who runs their society? How do they have heat in the winter? Like, all those nuanced questions. If they're just children, how do they maintain that? And so we're assuming they've been doing that they've been maintaining their lifestyle like that for 200 years. Wouldn't they have the experience of adults? Wouldn't they have more of a demeanor of adults after all 200 years of experience? That's more of a lifetime than most adults have. Most adults only get 40, 50, maybe 60 years of adulthood. They've had a couple hundred. So shouldn't they actually be wiser? Now, again, this is why I mentioned biological makeup of children, because especially before they go through puberty, their brains are less developed and still in development, so maybe they're incapable of retaining that kind of knowledge. And because this is such a fantastical sci-fi scenarios, it's hard for me to imagine how that would interact, because usually learning, growing, and becoming more wise is associated with the body growing as well, with puberty, with the brain growing and becoming more complex. So I don't know. So I could be wrong about that, about them becoming more experienced. But it seems like if they're able to maintain a society of children, that they have to have some sort of development. So maybe they shouldn't be running around going meh, meh, meh. So that kind of seems kind of inconsistent. I don't know. So it means I don't think they've really thought this scenario through that much. And yeah, so ultimately, I don't really like the behavior of the children. They seem... Well, I mean, I guess I could buy the fact that they're like ghosts and they disappear, because they've been living in that city for 200 years, and Kirk and Spock and all, and the security shirts just got there. So I could get that they could slip through and slip by them unseen. Even though they fucking have tricorders, though, they should. But I think this is, to be fair, this is the early episode before they really establish what a tricorder is, so we'll give them a pass for that. But they could just scan for life forms and be like, look, there's a bunch of kids over there. But anyway, as I said, give them a pass for that. I do buy that the kids would know the city better than them, and that they would be untrusting towards outsiders, especially adults, which they haven't seen in a couple hundred years. But I don't know, just the way that they behave and they go blah blah blah, study study study, or bonk bonk on the head. Like, again, totally 60s, and again, I think they would move beyond this after living there for 200 years. But that is just me. Now, one thing I want to talk about is the scene at the end where Kirk is trying to talk to the kids. It's a really stupid scene. It was always my least favorite, and this is how it's resolved. He goes, "I'm a grup, and I want to help." Like, that's so cheesy. But the fact that the kids would all beat the shit out of him, and a grown man couldn't get out of it, I don't know. And the whole, bonk bonk on the head. That whole thing is dumb. But one of my favorite lines of this episode has always been, because the kids are, when Kirk is trying to explain to them their situation, the kids are just going blah blah blah, and he goes, "No blah blah blah." I always thought that was hilarious. William Shatner's overacting. When I was like 18, 19, and my father would always give me these long, exaggerated lectures about car insurance or whatever bullshit it happened to be, and I would just want to go off and smoke weed and be left alone, and so I would always go like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. I remember one time he was like, "No, blah, blah, blah," and I was like, "Hey, it's like Kirk." That's what Kirk said. "No, blah, blah, blah." Anyway, I always thought it would be cool. I always had this idea to do, like, if I was never had any musical talents, but if I ever had played guitars in a metal band or something, to do a song and just use that clip, or maybe I could sing it myself, of Kirk saying "no blah blah blah," so it would be something like, just heavy guitars going dun-dun-dun, 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 "no blah blah blah, dun-dun-dun, 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 no blah blah blah." Maybe I've seen this episode way too many times, but that's what I was thinking about when I watched it. But anyway, let's talk about Miri, I guess. As I said, not really interested in this plot. This is something that I never cared about as a, not even teenage, preteen girl having a crush on an adult, which, is something a lot of shows have touched on, and something I'm sure happens. And for the most part, the way they portray it makes sense that she just has this crush on Kirk, because of course, as I've been covering this show, every single female in existence has to have the hots for Kirk in this show for some reason. It's really annoying, but I know it's something that is going to continue. But anyway, so even preteens who are like 300 years old have the hots for Kirk. And anyway, so yeah, so I've kind of buy that, but I didn't care about it. But one scene that I think is off, like, because I heard the opinion before that this is really cringy, that Kirk would be flirting with, a 12-year-old girl. But for the most part, the story portrays it as just a crush, a crush a young girl has on an adult male, which, as I said, happens sometimes. I'm thinking of that episode of The Simpsons that touched on this, when Lisa had a crush on her teacher. But anyway, there was one scene where Kirk is kind of flirting with her. So that is if they take that scene out, then it would be fine. But that scene is incredibly cringy, because it's his fault she had a crush, because that's how she started her crush on him, is after he was like, "You're a beautiful woman, a beautiful lady, or a beautiful girl," whatever he says, "a very, very beautiful girl." And I'm just like, Jesus fucking Christ, Kirk. She's 12 years old, or 11, or whatever. Like, that's jeez, yeah, that was the cringy, like, ugh. did not age well scene. I can't even believe that was acceptable in the 60s. Like the sleazy way he was saying it. Like, what kind of grown man, especially a stranger, that just, no, okay, just, I'm feeling creepy just talking about it. Just, so that's the one scene that was really disgusting. But if you remove that, then you could pass it off as just a young girl having a crush on an adult, because other than that scene, Kirk doesn't really flirt with her or hit on her. It's mainly just her having a crush on him. But anywho, then there's Yeoman Rand, who I gotta mention because this is the last episode that she made. I can't remember. I don't know about the air dates. I don't know if this is the last one she appeared in, but this is the last one they made before she got fired, which I am not going to get into great detail about. There's a lot of controversy surrounding that. You can look up other videos if you want, or other stuff on the internet if you want the full story on that. It's kind of not about this episode, so I'm not really going to get into it here, but it is very... She was mistreated, to put it very, very mildly. And so that is a shame that I think about whenever I watch these earlier episodes with her. But I never actually liked her character very much, which is no fault of the actress. It's just the way she's written, because she's written as someone who has the hots for Kirk. Particularly, as I said, this is something that constantly annoys me. And this scene in particular, which is like, Captain, I always want you to look at my legs. I'm like, what? No, she didn't. Like, that's not... That's not how I got her, that she was constantly... And why would you want... I don't know. So I didn't think Yeoman Rand was written very well. So, to be honest, I wasn't that sad at her departure. But, yeah, it is unfortunate, the real life circumstances surrounding her departure. So... God, what else is there to talk about this episode? The Grups and the Lonelies, I guess. The having the slang names is kind of a precursor for the Nemesis, the Voyager episode, the Glory Way After, and the... I don't know. Not as bad, it's just two slang words, which, I don't know, I guess kind of makes sense. And at least Kirk does mention... at the end of the episode that they're bringing teachers and people to come and help look after the kids, so they're not just leaving them there. Although they're leaving them there temporarily before. Maybe they should wait till the teachers get there. Just a suggestion, I guess. So, but anyway, they're at least not just totally screwing them and leaving them by themselves, because they already established that they're running out of food and whatnot. But yeah. So, I think that's all I gotta say. So, let me move over to thanking my patrons for supporting the channel. Very much, thank you so much. It really helps keep the channel going. So, I'll give a shout out to all my patron supporters. There's Anthony Didabictus, Ricky, Medi Jester, Joel Ovals, Brian A., Alessandro Miguelicio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Howells. Thank you so much for your support. Very much appreciated. And to continue this trend, this new feature that I'm doing with my videos, I shall read some comments that my Patreon supporters had on this episode. So the first comment from Patreon supporter comes from Maddie Jester, who says, "For me, this is another of those mediocre episodes I didn't remember all that well, but it wasn't too unpleasant of a rewatch experience. The trope of all the adults are gone and the children are their own little society isn't one I find particularly interesting. The leader of the pre-adolescent seems a bit odd to me. He was played by a man aged 26. In the end, I give it a 5 out of 10 and a shrug." I didn't realize he was 26. That's pretty crazy. He does look a bit older than the others, but 26. Yeah, that's pretty freaking nuts. It's funny that because I had a different experience than Matty Jester, because this is an episode I remembered even if I didn't end up liking it. It is one that always stuck with me, and I did find the concept interesting, as I talked about, where Matty apparently did not. So that's interesting. Anyway, next comment comes from Ricky. I find this episode average. There's nothing special to it. Not at all a bad episode or a terrible one, but very forgettable. The one memorable thing about it is the kids going bam, bam, bam. That's the only enjoyment I get from this. So my rating is a 5 average. And the next comment comes from Brandon. Brendan Howells says, the Enterprise finds an exact duplicate of Earth where all the adults, grups, have died due to experiments designed to prolong life, and remaining children, onlys, are hundreds of years old but will get terrible skin lesions and die when they hit puberty. The kids' endless chanting gets annoying very quickly. I do laugh at bonk bonk, though, because bonk means having a fuck in my country. As for John, the very old, very militaristic leader of the Grups, I'd ship him off to Vietnam. Oh, I think Brandon means the leader of the Onlys. Yeah. But anyway, the guy who's 26. But anyway, the romance between Kirk and Miri is just plain creepy and uncomfortable to watch. Kirk at the end saying he never gets involved with older women is face-palmingly bad. 3 blah blah blahs out of 10. So yeah, that is another thing I wanted to mention, is the whole thing of Kirk saying he doesn't get involved with older women, because that is kind of the Twilight thing. Because in the movies, Twilight movies, people talked about how creepy it was that, you know, they had the main character who's a teenager hook up with this vampire because, oh, they look the same age, but in fact the vampire is like several hundred years old, in fact he's actually much, much older, so they said there was a creep factor. But here, when you talk about Kirk creeping out on the 11-year-old, she's actually 300 years old. So this is which, I don't know, but she never went through puberty. So is it like a 300-year-old child? So it's still creepy? I don't know, it just makes it weird. And yeah, that joke was kind of, let's just like, Kirk, don't go there. It's just like, no. But anyway, so thank you so much, first of all, for the Patreon supporters for leaving your thoughts. They seem pretty low on this episode, 2 5s and a 3. I wouldn't go as low as a 3. But anyway, my rating for Miri out of 10 is a 6. Good. I guess I'm the highest. Well, at least out of the 4 samples we have here, because I have this attachment to this episode, as I said, because I always liked it a lot when I was a teenager, because of the weird premise I do find, unlike Maddie, I do find really interesting that there would be these children that would live for several hundred years and what the society would be like. And it was kind of a, you know, suspenseful and engaging, like them trying to be under the wire and find this disease or cure for this disease. But yeah, there's a lot of flaws, like the crush Miri has on Kirk was kind of creepy and unnecessary. The way the kids behave is very dated, and I don't really quite buy it for this particular scenario. And of course, the exact duplicate of Earth thing makes no sense and shouldn't be there. So there's a lot of flaws with this episode, but I still kind of like it. I still think it's a pretty good episode. So that is it for my review of Miri. Thank you so much for watching, and of course, if you would like to support me on Patreon, it would be very much appreciated. There will be a link in the description below. You get added goodies like pre-releases, leaving comments, and my access to my revisited series where I go back and review the episodes I had already reviewed and revisit them. So let me look at the schedule here to see exactly where we're at and what's coming up next. So, Thursday will be Prodigy, and then Saturday I'll be back on Patreon for a revisited video of my revisited of Conscience of the King. That's for Patreon supporters that will be released this Saturday. And on Monday, we got another revisited coming up on Patreon. The Galileo 7 revisited on Monday. And then Wednesday is when I'll return to my main channel publicly with a new review for Court Martial. So that is what's coming up on Enchantment of Eternity. So yes, please be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.